dear students, welcome back. In today's session, I'm going to give you the line-by-line easy explanation of the poem Why I Like the Hospital, written by Tony Hoagland. Tony Hoagland was a renowned modern American poet. And today we will read his poem, Why I Like the Hospital. Do check the pinned comment section for all important video links because we have already started the Macbeth series, the short stories and also the poems. I have already discussed A Living God as well as ABHISARA the TRYST, written by Rabindranath Tagore. Now coming back to today's topic, it's Why I Like the Hospital, and let us now read some of the literary works of Tony Hoagland. Sweet Ruin, there is Donkey Gospel, What Narcissism Means to Me, Priest turned Therapist Treats Fear of God. In his final book of poems, Turn Up the Ocean, published in 2022, he has been characterized as one of the most distinctive voices of our time, of our contemporary time. Hoagland's poetry is known for its acerbic, witty take on contemporary life, number one, and also straight talk. What is the meaning of acerbic? You need to clarify this concept. Acerbic means satirical or sarcastic. Acerbic, witty take on contemporary life. Throughout his career, Hoagland developed a method for wryly transposing the mundane. What is the meaning of mundane? The ordinary features of life into objects and events worth re-examining. Through irony, through affection, through love, through humor. And he also said that humor in poetry is even better than beauty. Therefore, in his poems, we find a mixture of both humor and pain. Humor as well as satire. Why I like the hospital? I'm sure that most people would agree that being in a hospital is never a nice thing to have to deal with, especially if someone is having an operation, having tests done, or are seriously ill. Hospital is a place which is associated with feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, fear, anxiety. It is not a good place to be in. Although we go to the hospital to recover, to heal ourselves, still there is fear associated with the term hospital. And strangely, ironically, the speaker likes the hospital. And does the poem tell us how the speaker has come to like this hospital? We will see that after reading the poem. The title, Why I Like the Hospital, is appealing, striking and suggestive. It automatically attracts the reader's attention. And the poem opens abruptly with the word because. The poem opens abruptly with a wry, humorous comment because it is all right to be in a bad mood there. There, where? In a hospital. This is the first reason. And what is the meaning of wry? I have already discussed, expressing disappointment and amusement. So this line is quite humorous, but it is also replete with a deep inner meaning. It is all right. It is absolutely perfect to be in a bad mood there. In a hospital, people are in a bad mood. They are not happy always. There is depression, there is fear, anxiety, anger, sadness. Patients are indeed in a bad mood, and it is perfectly all right for them to be in a bad mood if they are in a hospital. So does this mean that it is not appropriate for someone to be in a bad mood outside the hospital? Exactly. This is what the poet Tony Hoagland wants to convey. What is the theme of this poem? Let's now see that in detail. In contemporary materialistic world, people have become so impersonal, so self-centered, so indifferent that in their life they allow no scope for expressing their feelings openly. In Western culture, They are literally prepared to suppress their emotions and sentiments, even in the face of personal loss or tragedy. Even if something really bad has happened to you, you are prepared not to express your emotions openly. You are prepared to put on a facade of self-control. And what is the impact of this? If you are continuously suppressing yourself, if you are continuously suffocating yourself, what will happen? This will impact your mental health as well as your physical health. There will be health hazards and there will be psychological problems as well. This is exactly what the poet wants to highlight in this poem. It is all right to be in a bad mood inside a hospital, but outside it is considered to be inappropriate behavior. If you are in a bad mood, still you will have to pretend that you are happy and you are fine, you're doing good. Slouching along through the underground garage, riding wordlessly on the elevator with the other customers, staring at the closed beach doors like a prison wall. So the poet, the speaker, is moving with his head bent and his shoulders slouching through the underground garage, and then silently he shares an elevator with other customers. Other customers? What is the meaning of this? This is a dig at the present day medical system in which patients are just customers. Wordlessly, everyone is silent. Nobody is speaking to the other person, even if they are on the elevator. An elevator is a very limited space. It is a restricted space. Even in that restricted space, they are so close to each other. They are standing so close to each other, yet they are not speaking to each other. They are just customers about to enter the hospital. Staring at the closed beach doors like a prison wall. The hospital is like a prison and the closed doors are like a prison wall. The figure of speech here is simile. And what is a simile? Comparison between two different things, and the comparison is direct. Jail represents confinement and restriction or being stuck in an unhappy situation. Similarly, in a hospital, the patients face restricted mobility. They have to depend on medical caregivers. They are socially isolated and they are helpless. They are usually helpless. Therefore, it is like entering a prison. If you are entering the hospital, it is like entering the prison, a life of restriction and confinement. This is the simile over here. I like the hospital for the way it grants permission for pathos. In the first stanza, the hospital is considered to be a prison wall, and ironically, in the second stanza, again, the poet uses a wry comment. I like the hospital for the way it grants permission for pathos. You are given the permission, you are allowed to express yourselves openly. Elsewhere, you will not get this facility. You will not get this permission. And therefore, the speaker likes the hospital simply for the way it allows the patients to express themselves openly. The mother with cancer deciding how to tell her kids. The bald girl gazing downward at the shunt installed above her missing breast. The crone in her pajamas walking with an ivy pole. So, these are scenes of suffering. There are terminally ill patients, patients who are seriously ill. The mother with cancer deciding how to tell her kids. She is hesitating. A cancer diagnosis impacts patients, their families, and people taking care of them in a big way. It can be a life-changing experience, and the people involved, including the patient, go through a lot emotionally, be it anxiety, anger, depression, Only a cancer patient knows what and how she feels. And here the image of the mother with cancer hesitating whether she should tell her kids about her terminal illness is really moving. It is heart-wrenching. It is disturbing. It is tragic. This shows the helplessness of the mother. The kids will face uncertainty if something happens to the mother, and therefore she is filled with doubt. She is filled with hesitation. The bald girl, the physical appearance of the girl, this girl is terminally ill and she has turned bald. There is no hair. So physical appearance also changes in patients who are terminally ill. The bald girl gazing downward at the shunt. What is the meaning of shunt? Shunt means, write down, shunt means a small tube to carry blood. And gazing downward, looking downward intently, in despair. She is filled with despair. First we have the mother suffering from cancer and she is hesitating to reveal her sickness to her kids. And then we have the bald girl gazing. She is depressed. She is gazing at the tube installed above her missing breast. So one of her breasts is missing. The crone in her pajamas walking with an IV pole. Crone, ugly old woman. She is in her pajamas wearing loose fitted clothes and she is walking with an intravenous pole. A pole to hang bags of medicine or fluid for administration to a patient. This also shows the limited mobility of the old woman. She is very weak. She is sick and she has to walk with an IV pole. So these images are images of suffering, grief and depression. Yet the poet likes the hospital because it grants permission for pathos. And what is the meaning of pathos? Passions. You are allowed to express your passions, your feelings, your sentiments in a hospital. This is the pitiable plight of modern man. He has to put on a facade. I don't like the smell of antiseptic or the air conditioning set on high all night or the fresh flowers tossed into the waste basket. In the first two stanzas, the poet tells us why he likes the hospital. And in the third stanza, he tells us what he does not like about the hospital. I don't like the smell of antiseptic. An antiseptic is a substance that stops or slows down the growth of microorganisms. And they are frequently used in hospitals to reduce the risk of infection during surgery and other procedures. And many people notice this smell of hospitals, this distinctive hospital smell, and they do not like it. It is sometimes terrifying and it is associated with sickness and death for many. Similarly, this speaker also doesn't like the smell of antiseptic. He also does not like the excessive air conditioning set on high all night. There is cold and chill all around. And this chilly atmosphere is also symbolic of the lack of warmth and happiness in the lives of the patients. Or the fresh flowers tossed into the waste basket. Now this image of fresh flowers being tossed, being thrown into the waste basket shows human callousness and antipathy. Keep this in mind. Fresh flowers tossed into the waste basket, human callousness and antipathy. But again, he returns to explain why he likes the hospital. But I like the way some people on their plastic chairs break out a notebook and invent a complex scoring system to tally up their days on earth. Their days are numbered. Some patients will die. Death is inevitable. And they start tallying up their days on earth. They develop a complex scoring system. Scoring system, the figure of speech here is alliteration. And other examples of alliteration: permission for pathos. Permission, pathos. Permission starts with a P and pathos also starts with a P. Now, dear students, look for other examples of alliteration in the poem and do mention that in the comment section. Let's come back to stanza number 4 now. A complex scoring system to tally up their days on earth. The column on the left that says times I acted like a fool, facing the column on the right that says times I acted like a saint. Now, the image depicted here is both amusing and thought-provoking. The poet watches some people sitting on plastic chairs, bringing out their notebooks and calculating the foolish and saintly deeds that they did, and they write them down in 2 different columns. The first column, times I acted like a fool, and the second column, times I acted like a saint. What is the significance of this? Now, in the last stage of life, a person might regret or feel guilty about things they have done or not done, or maybe about things they have said. We feel regret when we think that we should have done something differently, or maybe there is something we wish we had not done at all. So this is the most common emotion experienced near the end of life. It is guilt and regret. The poet uses humor in order to highlight the guilt and regret in the lives of these patients who will soon die, whose days on earth are numbered. The poet lights a scene. This is perhaps possible only in the hospital, where you are forced to reflect over your good actions and bad actions. This is humor as well as irony here. Elsewhere, outside the hospital, a modern man does not have time for himself to introspect, to reflect, to think deeply about his actions. When he is in a hospital, when he is weak, he is vulnerable, he is helpless, he's about to die, he gets the time. This is the irony. He gets the time to calculate his actions, to prepare a tally chart. And there is also the agony, the pain of these patients who are filled with regret and guilt. They have achieved a lot, but there is still more to achieve. But their days on the earth are numbered. So this is the pain. This is the agony. I like the long prairie of the waiting. Prairie, vast grassland. Here it means continuous. This is another reason. Hospital stays can be mundane, but for many patients, the isolation from family or friends can negatively impact their health as well as mind. That is why it is important to visit your loved ones and keep them mentally stimulated, keep them happy. But here, ironically, again, the poet presents the plight of the lonely, alienated, sick persons in an indirect way. The poet says that he likes to see how some sick persons in the hospital keep on waiting for someone to come to see them. But unfortunately, nobody comes and they are forced into loneliness. So there is irony here also. The forced intimacy of the self with the self. And here, the patient is forced to come face to face with himself. He gets a chance to get intimate with his own soul. He looks into himself and he starts introspecting, contemplating, and reflecting. And this is forced. This intimacy, this friendship of the self with the self is forced. Each sick person standing in the middle of a field like a tree wondering what happened to the forest. Each sick person is like a lonely tree in the middle of the field wondering what happened to the forest. And this is the most disturbing image of the contemporary life: alienation and loneliness. This is the most disturbing image of the contemporary life, and this is another simile which helps convey the feelings of surprise and loneliness of each sick person. In a forest there are many trees, but in a wasteland there are hardly any trees. And modern world, contemporary world is also like a wasteland, and the sick person, each sick person compares himself to a tree, wondering what happened to the forest. And once I saw a man in a lime green dressing gown, hunched over in a chair, a man who was not yelling at the doctors, yelling, shouting, or pretending to be strong. He was not putting on a facade. He was not pretending to be mentally strong or making a murmured, low, indistinct phone call to his wife. But what was he actually doing? He was sobbing without shame. He was crying shamelessly. He was exhibiting his emotions openly without any inhibitions. He was sobbing without shame. He had nothing to lose. He was about to die. So he had nothing to think about and nobody to be afraid of, nothing to be ashamed of. He was sobbing without shame. Sobbing without shame, figure of speech, alliteration. Sobbing starts with an S and shame also starts with an S. Pumping it all out from the bottom of the self. Giving vent to your feelings and emotions. Pumping. Throwing out. All from the bottom of the self, the overflowing bilge of helplessness and rage. What is the meaning of rage? Anger. And bilge? Nonsense. A man no longer expecting to be saved. A terminally ill patient. Patients who have a serious life-threatening illness will normally experience sadness, grief, and loss. And here the poet presents the picture of such a person who is suffering from a life-threatening illness, and he is terminally ill and he is going to die, and nobody can save him. There is no hope. No longer expecting to be saved. This means that there is hopelessness all around. There is no hope. The doctors cannot cure him. And what is the mental condition of such a patient? He is not talking to his wife. He is perhaps detached from all worldly ties. He is just communicating with his own self. And he is expressing, he is pumping out all his innermost feelings, expressions which were so long stifled inside him. Pumping it all out, just as you pump out water and it overflows. Similarly, this terminally patient man was also pumping all his emotions out of his soul, out of his deepest core of the heart. The overflowing bilge nonsense of helplessness. He was helpless and he was angry as well. Why was he dying? Why him? Why me? A man no longer expecting to be saved. Patients are sometimes filled with anger because they are too helpless to control that anger. And this person was just sobbing without shame. And it is only in the hospital is he allowed to do so. But if you looked, you could see that he was holding his own hand in sympathy, listening to every single word, and he was telling himself everything. There was no one to listen to him. He was all alone. There was no one to console him. No one to hold his hand with sympathy. He was left all alone, bedridden, waiting for his death. So this is the stark reality of our times. We are left alone in our direst need, and Tony Hoagland exposes this stark reality of our modern times. But the ending is complex. We can also perhaps interpret that during the dying hours, during the dying days, patients are perhaps detached from their worldly ties. They start communicating with themselves. They are left all alone in their struggle for existence, and they know that their chances of survival are just too dim. In this way, they feel alienated, they feel lonely, and they start talking to themselves. So we can interpret this complex image in both ways. Dear students, the poet implicitly wants to ask why it is right to be in bad mood in a hospital. Why not elsewhere? Why must you pretend to be all right with a fake smile at all other places? It is all about giving expression to your feelings and emotions openly. And the tragedy is, when a patient is in a hospital, he is in his most vulnerable state, then he is allowed to express his feelings and not before that. This is the tragedy. I hope you have understood this poem, and I will solve the questions, the workbook solutions very soon.